Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming. I'm Meghan Fahey, and I'll be teaching this class today on how to make these chunky hand knit blankets that you may be seeing everywhere. I have a lovely display behind me of some of the chunky hand knit blankets that I've already made. So with just 4 or 5 skeins of a really thick jumbo yarn, you can make something extraordinarily beautiful. And they make fantastic gifts that really wow people. If you have a wedding coming up or some kind of anniversary or some kind of birthday that's special, they can really wow a crowd and think absolutely handmade is always best. So a 6 or a 7, it really depends on the thickness of the yarn. I saw that question in the chat. So as we go, please feel free to ask as many questions as you want to in the chat, and I'll try and answer them as we go. Thank you for coming. We are going to go ahead and talk about the different yarns, and then I will talk about some of the other classes too. So if you enjoy this class, I also have a class on how to do chunky knit hearts. Felicia, am I on my overhead or forward facing?
You're on your overhead.
Okay, yeah, so the chunky knit hearts are another video that's already available on YouTube. So if you like this chunky hand knitting, you can make different size pillows. We also have a really adorable pillow coming up that is a bunny with a little bunny tail. So taking that chunky knit yarn and making some floppy ears and a tail is going to be a really adorable springtime pillow as well. So I'm going to be teaching you some of the basics. We're going to do a mini blanket. The entire blanket, I would recommend 4 to 5 skeins. So a skein like this will have a weight on it. And the weight on this one says a 7, which is jumbo. Even if you have a 7, you can have different thicknesses. So for example, the fluffy Chenille is one of the new ones at Michael's with loops and threads. And it is a lot thicker because it has all that fluffy Chenille going on. And so even though both of these are a 7, this is obviously going to look a lot thicker than this one because of its fluffiness. You can also have variegated yarn colors that have the color changing going on in it. So you can use some of those. Bernat has some really great different colors. So I'm going to be using like a darker rose and a lighter rose going on here. So whatever we do in this class today, if you happen to get lost or if you need me to slow down, you can let me know. I will try and repeat things as many times as I can. And then if you need to watch the video again, especially to finish your full size blanket, the video will be available on YouTube tomorrow and you'll be able to watch it from there. I also put up one video so far on Learn with Michaels and 4M Coleman on Instagram, and they are showing how to make the slip knot. So if you get stuck at the very first step of how to make a slip knot, I have a couple quick, short 1-minute videos to show you how to do that. And if anybody thinks there might be another one of those skills you want me to make a little mini video again, I can make those available on Instagram as well. So with the 4 to 5 skeins of something like the Bernat or the Cozy Blanket, which is a Michaels brand, or this fluffy Chenille I had shown you that's a Michaels brand, the size of your blanket will always depend on how tight your stitches are, what type of yarn you're using, and a lot of other factors. So you'll notice that these are all the same number of stitches and how dramatically different these are. So just go ahead and pick what you like, and you'll kind of have to go from there. I have had the experience of having something like this one or this one, actually these 3. I haven't tried a full blanket of this one, but with 4 or 5 skeins of this, you can usually get something that's about at least 3 or 4 feet wide and 3 or 4 feet long, depending on which way you go with it. So I'll show you when we do our test sample how much you can get done, how many stitches to make it the width that you're interested in. And then you can always keep adding to the length of the blanket, but you can't keep adding to the width of the blanket. So you're basically going to pick your width and go from there. So without further ado, we are ready to make a slip knot. So if you have some yarn, go ahead and find in the center of your yarn is usually one of the ends. So you might have to dig in and find the end of your yarn. I'm really digging in this one. And ripping it out. until I find that end. There's a center pull string and there's going to be a wraparound pull string. And it is better to use the center one if you can find it. So I just scooped out the guts of this yarn skein and was finally able to find my center. And what we're about to do to get started is we're going to learn how to make a slip knot with this giant yarn. And then after the slip knot, we're going to learn how to do some chain stitching with this giant yarn. Then we're going to learn how to attach those chain stitches together with knit stitches. All of this will be done without using any tools, no knitting needles involved, no crochet hooks, just strictly our hands and this big jumbo yarn. So in order to make a slip knot, you're going to want to take some of your fingers. I'm right-handed, so you can do it this way. Even if you're left-handed, you can still do it this way. And point some fingers towards yourself. And then the side of the yarn that's loose is called the tail. And the side of the yarn that's attached to the giant skein is called the working yarn. So I'm pointing my fingers towards me, and I'm going to drape some of the tail on the left side of my fingers. And I'm going to have the working yarn coming on the right side of my fingers and the left side of my fingers. So I have this. My fingers are pushed towards me, pointing towards me. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold on to both the tail and the working yarn down here. And I'm going to twist. I'm going to use my wrist and I'm going to twist counterclockwise. So see how there's no twist? And then see how the yarn is twisted right here? You can see that. There you go. Right here, there's a twist. Then I'm going to take these pincher fingers and I'm going to grab the working yarn, which remember is the one attached to the skein. And I'm going to pull some of that working yarn through, and that's going to make a slip knot. Now you'll know that you made a slip knot if the knot actually does go up and down. If it slips and slides, then it is a slip knot and you did the right thing. I'm going to show that process again, just in case you didn't catch it. So in order to make a slip knot, point some fingers towards yourself, drape the yarn so that you have the tail on one side and you have the skein on the other. And then I'm going to take my fingers and I'm going to twist counterclockwise. So I took my fingers and I twist it counterclockwise, put my pincher fingers inside of that loop I've created and grab the working yarn. And I'm grabbing this working yarn and pulling the working yarn through. And I'm pulling on the loop and I'm pulling on the tail in order to tighten that slip knot. And the slip knot should slide up and down. So there is a slip knot video that's available already on Instagram for Learn with Michaels. So if you want to keep watching that, I'll do it one more time and then we're going to move on to the chain stitches. So for slip knot, and these are the basic foundations. Am I frozen? There we go. So these are the basic foundations, and really there are about 3 things to learn. And then the rest of it is just time making your blanket. So a complete blanket of 4 skeins is probably going to take you about 2.5 to 3 hours, depending on how quickly you move. But you can finish a whole blanket in a day, which any of us who are yarn crafters, finishing a project in one day is pretty outstanding. So here we go with the slip knot. Fingers are pointing towards me. And you have your tail, you have your working yarn. You're twisting your fingers counterclockwise, grabbing the working yarn, and you have a slip knot. So move your slip knot so that you have about 3 or 4 fingers should be the width of your slip knot. And what we're going to do in order to chain stitch is we are going to grab with our pincher fingers and pull through. So here's our slip knot. You're going to grab with your pincher fingers and pull a loop through. Then you're going to go through that loop with your pincher fingers and you're going to grab some more of the working yarn. So you're going to be going through each one of these loops and you're going to be grabbing some of the working yarn and pulling it through. So sometimes it's easier to work flat on a table than holding it up like what I was doing before. So I'll show it again from a flat perspective. I have my slip knot, and right now I want everybody to chain about 10. So here's my slip knot. I'm putting my pincher fingers through and I'm pulling about that same amount. So each time, this is how I keep even stitches, is keeping the same number of fingers, pulling that same amount of yarn each time. It doesn't really matter which side you're pulling it through as long as you're consistent and keep pulling it through over and over again. So these are knit stitches. And the way that you'll know you have knit stitches are with this characteristic V shape. So these are each stitches. And we're going to keep practicing this chain stitch by just pulling up. And you can see that if you pull a lot of loop one time and then a little bit of loop next time, see how those stitches are going to be uneven. This is a much bigger stitch than this one. So the way that you keep these nice and even is by trying to keep measuring or trying to keep pulling the same amount each time. So you're going to take a couple fingers and pull it up and through, couple fingers up and through, couple fingers up and through. So people who are understanding the chain stitching, go ahead and chain yourself 10 stitches, and we're going to do a little mini blanket that goes over all the techniques you'll need to make the larger blanket. I will go over the slip knot again, and I will go over the chain again. So we'll go ahead and chain 10 stitches first, and then we'll come back. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 I have. I'm trying to keep them even and pulling the same amount of working yarn up each time. So I'm grabbing loops with my fingers and kind of laying them down on the table. The way you undo a stitch is really fun. You just pull and it's gonna eventually undo it. And it's okay if you have more or less than 10. Somewhere around 10 would be a great little starter size just to kind of practice all the techniques with me. So I have about 10 stitches, and hopefully you will soon too. While we're waiting for our 10 stitches, I'm going to show the slip knot one more time. So I have fingers towards me. Here's my tail. Here's my working yarn. Twist the fingers. So twist, use your wrist and twist. Grab the working yarn and pull. All right, and then for the chain, you just keep pulling up loops through each one of these. And then do you see all these V's that I have? And hopefully you have too. So when you have all of this, we're ready to do the next row. So with the next row, I like to put the working yarn, like I like to work flat on a table like this. And I like to have the working yarn going in the direction of where my stitches are going to go. So I'm going to be moving in this direction next. And you have this loop. And for me, my working yarn is down towards the table and the loop is coming up towards me. Check this right now. If your working yarn is coming out towards you and your loop is down towards the table, I need you to flip it over because you're going to want all your stitches so that the working yarn is coming down. So if you haven't turned yours over or checked yours out, make sure that the working yarn is going down. If I tried to make a stitch through this loop, it wouldn't work because that's where I end it. And it's kind of like undoing itself if I went through that one. So you're actually going to leave this stitch. And then if you look at the top of the row, you're going to have a space at the top of each one of these places where we're going to be pulling loops through. So I am going to leave this loop alone. My working yarn is going this way, and I have this. I'm going to pull a loop. Oops. Guess what I did? All right, now I'm ready. What did I do? I'm going to pull a loop through, and I think I have it upside down. Yep, I do. So I think I accidentally told you the wrong thing, and I apologize. The working yarn needs to be coming out towards us. The way I knew that that was a mistake was because when I went through this first stitch, it undid itself. So I knew I was doing something wrong. So I'm flipping this over and the working yarn is coming out towards me now. And the loop is going down towards the table. Apologies. And then I'm going to go through this first space and I'm going to pull a loop of yarn up and over. And then I'm going to go to the next stitch and I'm going to pull a loop of yarn up and over. I'm going to go to the next stitch and go up and over. So basically, you're taking the working yarn behind it and you're pulling about the same amount. So notice I want to try and keep my loops nice and even. And you're going to pull that same amount of yarn out of each one of these spaces over and over and over again. And this is going to create your knit stitches. Now, when you're pulling these loops through, your chain will start to fan like mine is doing right now. And that's okay. That's normal because at the very end, we'll go back through and do a last stitch, which is going to pull everything and straighten it back up. So I've gone through, I left the first stitch alone and I used these ones and pulled loops through each one of these. I'll definitely show that again, so don't worry. And in case somebody was asking again, this is how I rip out my stitches. I just gently pull and I can go right back to that chain that I had. And this is where I was getting us confused at the beginning. Okay. So I have my chain. It doesn't matter how long your chain is right now. Then you're going to pull, go through one of these loops. So here's the one I'm leaving alone right here. I'm going to pull a bit of yarn and pull it through, coming out and over. I'm going to pull it out and over, and I'm going to keep going across.
Hey, Megan, I just want to make a quick note because I know I've seen a lot of the same comments.
Okay.
If you are I would highly suggest if you're having a hard time following along with Megan, it may be good just to watch at this moment and practice when the video comes out. We are going to work to see if we can get this video available before the end of business today. We kind of knew you guys may enjoy it, so we're going to try to see if we can work to get this video on our YouTube channel before the end of day. So definitely if you're having a hard time, please watch, and then you'll be able to stop the video, rewind the video, pause the video as often as you need to in order to catch what she's doing.
Absolutely. And give yourself time because this is a brand new craft to a lot of you. So give yourself some time and some patience and you will get the hang of it. So do
Yes.
not panic.
Allow yourself some grace. It's
Absolutely.
okay.
Absolutely. And the really good news is if any of you are very fast learners and you already have something going on like this, the good news is you're just going to keep doing this. So there's really not a lot of extra techniques to learn. Once you get down your slip knot, once you get down your chain stitch, and once you learn how to knit, that's what you need for a blanket. So those of you who already are picking this up pretty quickly, you can actually go through, and the next time I show this process again, start your actual blanket at the actual length that you want it to be. So I'm going to keep going for a little bit, but I do promise that I will go back and explain again. And people who are with me so far, you can keep going and we'll kind of show the process a little bit. I'll do a couple more rows. I'll finish off the pretend blanket and then we'll start again and I'll show everybody how to start again. And those of you who want to start your full size blanket can go ahead and do that already. So far here's what we have. I land it with my working yarn over here. And so what's going to happen this time is you're going to be going in this direction. And so my working yarn I put behind it, and you're going to go through each one of these loops that are already laying here. And you're going to take a piece of yarn and pull it through each one of these loops. So you're going to pull a new loop through each one of these loops. Do you pull up each of the stitches to allow you to count the stitches? You can do that, absolutely. Yep. And yes, the number of chain stitches at the beginning is what determines the width. Now, here's an important thing. Remember at the beginning, we skipped this one, and this stitch is kind of hanging out like a thumb at the end of your finger, at the end of your hand. So this is important not to miss this one. So I want you to go ahead and pull a loop through this one, and then that will bring all of your stitches up into the same row. So we skipped it the first time, but we did not skip it any other time. We will not skip it any other time. Okay. Now, I see a question about counting, and it depends on how perfect you need your blanket to be. What I love about the blanket is I can sit down in front of a TV and watch a show and make a whole blanket in one sitting because I don't have to count and I don't have to concentrate. I just do it. You probably will be able to do it without counting at all. So that makes it a lot easier than some of the crochet patterns or knit patterns where you really have to pay attention to your counting. Okay, I finished that row. And this is where my working yarn is, and this is my last loop. Now, when I go this direction, it is okay from now on to pull a stitch through this loop, and it did not come undone right there. I'm going to pull another loop through the next stitch, and I'm going to go across in this direction, pulling one through each thing. So long string seems to be on different side than yours. So the long string, I think you mean the working yarn. So I like to keep my working yarn up at the end of away from me on my table, and I like to keep my project towards me. And then I keep the working yarn going in the direction I'm going. So you can count at this point. So far I've pulled up 3 stitches. If you want to count and make sure that you keep the same number each time, that's okay. It's also okay to not count and just go for it. So if you're kind of joining us halfway through or a little bit lost, I will be going back to the beginning again. So the number, yes, the 7 determines how thick the yarn is. If you're using a 7, I would go ahead and get 4 skeins of yarn, but then if you decide that you want it longer, you can easily add another skein to it. So 4 or 5, or if you know you want a long blanket right away, go ahead and get 5 or even 6. A table is easier. Absolutely, I'm sorry. A nice sturdy surface is great. Okay, I'm going to go back through. My working yarn is right here. I'm about to go this direction. So I'm going to pull a loop through this last one. The only time you skip a loop is that very first row, that very first time you're adding a row. So I pull a loop through each one of these. Thanks for coming and trying. I'm sorry if there's frustration. It's tough learning a new craft, so give yourself some time. You will get the hang of it. And the video later will, I hope, give you all the time you need to learn this. I'm happy to answer questions, and I will go back and start again, probably in about 5 minutes. So I'm going to pretend like we're at the end of our blanket, and I'm going to show everybody how to finish the blanket. And then we can go back and I can start again and kind of show some of the beginning. And people who want to, who are following along and doing okay with pulling your loops so far, you can go ahead and start your full-size blanket and make it as long as you'd like it to be. I highly recommend a table if you have one. I know doing it on the ground or something would hurt your back. So if you have a nice sturdy table, that would be awesome. So yeah, with the pulling up the last stitch 11 instead of 10, you may have counted wrong the first time, or you may have added an extra one in. It's really not going to be very visible. It's really going to be okay. The chunky yarn forgives a lot of things, so don't worry too much if you have some other struggles. So here's how you finish off your blanket. If this was my full entire width. This was as wide as I wanted it to be, and this was as long as I wanted my blanket to be. That would be a very weird blanket, but the way you finish is the same as what we've been doing, except when you are pulling loops, you're going to pull your loops twice as long as you did before. So notice how this loop is not that bad, but this loop right here is a lot longer. So you are going to pull a nice double length loop through each one of these. Yeah, keeping your loops the same size. I bet if you're working flat on a table, when you see them, you can kind of tell that they're the same size. So that might help you keep them the same size. Cool. All right. I like that some of you are following along and doing this now with me. I know it's tough with first learning, don't worry. So I'm pulling double length loops from each one of these stitches. Yes, once you get the hang of it, you're gonna love it. You're just not even gonna remember that you ever struggled. You're just gonna be whipping these blankets out for everybody you know. They are selling them places for like $90, $100, all different kinds of amounts of money. So you could start your own business. All right, I have pulled loops double the length of all of the other ones I've done before. And then the way that you would absolutely finish your blanket is, since this is where my last loop is over here, and my working yarn is over here, the end of my blanket is going to come this direction towards the working yarn. So because this is where I left off, and it depends where you leave off which part of the row, but you go to the opposite side of where your working yarn is, and I'm going to put my fingers through this double length loop, and I'm going to grab the next loop and pull it through. Then I'm going to put my fingers through that loop, and I'm going to grab the next loop and pull it through. You're going to grab each loop and then switch and go through the new loop, grab, put your fingers through the new loop, grab the next one, put your fingers through the next one, grab, and you're just going to keep switching. And what you're doing is, you see this lovely stitch that's appearing at the top of my blanket? That's finishing off the blanket with this really nice top stitch. And the reason why our loops are double the length is because it gave us that room to pull those over. And then you'll see that when mine was fanning out before, looks like a really nice solid line now. So that last stitch going across pulls it across really nicely. And the way that you finish this is, you give yourself a little bit of tail. You don't have to cut yours. I'm cutting mine right now, but you don't have to. And you're going to just take the tail and go through the last loop and pull that tightly. And then you might want to go through another place and kind of just tie another knot. And then honestly, that's it. You can either weave in the ends, and by weaving in the ends, I mean kind of pull some of the stitches and then kind of hide this yarn through some of the other stitches. Or it is okay to just go ahead and cut it close to where that knot is. We are going to talk about color change, and we are going to talk about changing skeins, because I told you that it'll take about 4 skeins to make the entire blanket. So those are going to be some other important things to do when we start this next portion. So I'll probably have an intermediate class later too that's going to show you 2 kinds of stitches you can put together. But this is the basic stitch of just this knit stitch. And notice how on this side I have all these nice V's in these rows, in these lines. And on the other side, see how it's like a horizontal pattern? So if you've ever done any knitting before, these are your purl stitches and these are your knit stitches. So there are going to be some other blankets that I can show you later where you can combine those purls and knits together to make some different alternating patterns. So this is kind of the overall process of the blanket. So thank you for watching so far. And I am going to go ahead and start with another blanket. If you kind of caught what we were doing before, feel free to make this next part as big as you want it to be. I think the width, I would go for no smaller than 20. I think 20 stitches, regardless of which kind of yarn you have, is going to get you about a beach towel, a large beach towel in width. But if you do about 30 stitches, I think that's going to give you a nice width that'll go over your lap pretty nicely. Maybe you and your dog. So, all right. Those of you who have been waiting, here comes this next part. All right, we are starting from the beginning. Here we go. And if you missed the slip knot this time, again, that video is already available on YouTube, or not on YouTube, on Instagram at Learn with Michaels right now. Okay, here is my slip knot. Lost track. All right, I have my working yarn. I have my tail. I have my fingers towards myself. I'm grabbing with my left hand. And then you can tell that right here, none of this yarn is crossed over itself. So what you need to do is make the yarn cross over itself. So what I did was I turned my fingers in order to make this yarn turn over itself and give you that cross. And if you have that cross, then you can grab the working yarn and you can pull it through. Now, if you grab the tail or if the cross is in the other direction, you might need to grab a different piece, not the working yarn. But if you're set up the exact same way as me, fingers pointing towards you, tail, working yarn, and you cross, then you can pull through and that's your slip knot. All right, slip your knot to make this about 3 or 4 fingers in width. If you want it to be tighter, or if you have small yarn, you might want it to be tighter. Some people like it to be loose, and it almost is like fishing net kind of thing, but this is thick yarn, so you might get too hot if you have this blanket on. So some people like to space out their stitches on purpose.
Hey,
All
Megan,
right. Yes.
I know you just started. I had a quick question. Did you have another color? Because I think that too
Okay.
may have
Yeah,
lots
sure.
of people.
Let's see what else. How is this yellow? Is this any better?
Can you guys chime in? Let us know if that's a better color for you instead of the pink or blush looking color.
I'm going to assume unless anyone tells me differently. Cool. Thank you. Appreciate your help. All right. So I have my fingers towards me, tail, working yarn, twist around, grab and pull through. And then once you have your slip knot, make sure that your slip knot is the size you want it to be. And you're going to grab some working yarn and pull it through. Then you have a new loop. You're going to grab some working yarn and pull it through. Grab some working yarn and pull it through. And keep going, and you are making these chain stitches. Yes, when you are changing colors, you are going to create a knot. You really just tie the skeins together. That's really all you do. And then you can pull it nice and tight and then cut down the ends, and you should be able to hide it pretty nicely. You won't be able to see the knot. And I'm going to pull a loop through. So I'm going to do a smaller piece so that it fits nicely in my camera. But if you're ready to do your full length blanket, I recommend probably about 30 stitches. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stitches. And I would say that mine is about 9 inches. So if I had 30 stitches, 9, 10, about 9. How many stitches did I say I had? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if I had 5 stitches, let me just check my width. That's about 8 inches. So if you do 30, you're gonna get 48 inches, which is 4 feet. So 4 feet is a really nice width for your blanket, and you can keep going from there. I don't know about burning the yarn on the end. I've never tried that myself. I have no idea if that works or not. Okay, so this was a chain. Do as many chains as you want to. And then we're going to do this next part where we pull up our first loop. And when we pull up our first loop, I'm going to leave this one alone, and I am going to pull up and over. I'm going to go to the next spot and pull up and over. Oops, I did the same thing. I didn't flip mine. So I have my working yarn coming out towards me. I'm going to pull up and over. I left this one alone. I pulled up and over. I pulled up and over, up and over, up and over. So you will have one stitch that's kind of off to the side, and that's okay because that's the first one we skipped. You're never going to skip a stitch again. So when we go back this next direction, you do not need to skip this first one. You can just go ahead and pull a stitch through and pull a stitch through and keep going. Now, when you get to where this stitch is kind of hanging out by itself, do not forget about it. Go ahead and pull a loop through it. And by pulling the loop through it, you've kind of brought it into the grouping. Did I stitch through the slip knot? I did not. Now I'm ready to go to my next row. The blanket will fan out. That's totally normal. But when you do that last stitch at the end, it's going to bring it all together. And I will show that stitch again too before we go, so don't worry. All right. I'm just building up rows as I go. I'm putting my working yarn down in the direction I'm going. I'm pulling loops through. And I'm trying to keep my loops as even as I can so that my stitches end up being pretty even. This is the fanning part I've been talking about, so notice how it's kind of starting to fan out. That's okay. Each time you build a row, when you put your working yarn going in this direction, be careful because if the working yarn gets stuck on something and I just pull a loop through, see how you have this extra dangly bit that's not a part of your blanket? So make sure that your working yarn is tucked nicely underneath that first stitch, and you can pull it up and through, up and through, up and through. And you keep going. And I'm getting I have a really short number of chain stitches to begin with, so I'm able to build pretty fast. But you are using the same pattern over and over again of just pulling up these loops. And you start getting speedy at it, and you start just being able to zone out. I'm not counting, I'm not really paying attention because there's not really that much to miss once you get going. So I'm going to pretend like it's the last stitch again. And I'm going to pull double length loops. So pull it double what you've been pulling, 2 times as big. And I'm lining these loops up. Double the length. And the reason for the double the length is because we're going to stitch this all together to finish this off. So I have a question in the chat that's talking about when you're done with the chain stitches, leaving the 6th one, and when you come back to it. Yes, so if you want your blanket, if it matters to you that your blanket is exactly 10, then you should always do 1 extra one. So you should make 11 stitches because that is what's going to happen when you go back through. Yep. So you can always add 1 if you care about exactly how many stitches it's going to be. But truly, if you do 30 stitches and you end up with 29, that's going to be okay too. So I have done all the double loops, and this is the finish of the top of the blanket. And wherever the working yarn stops is the direction we're going to finish in. So it's going to finish off over here, which means I start here. A whole blanket with 4 skeins will probably take about 3 hours. So I'm going to take my fingers and I'm going to go through this first loop, and I'm going to grab the second loop, and I'm going to pull the second loop through that one that I just had. So I'm going to grab and pull it through. Then I'm putting my fingers in this new one, and I'm grabbing and pulling the next one through. And you're going to keep going back and forth, not back and forth, just keep going across, grabbing each one of those loops and pulling it through to make these really nice stitches at the top to kind of finish off your blanket. So yes, I'm seeing some things in chat about if you're using a really fluffy Chenille, this is definitely probably going to be better for someone who may have tried this before already and already knows what they're doing, because the fluffier something is, the harder it's going to be to see your stitches. So that might be rough for you to figure out your first time. So I'm going to take this back part off one more time and show you the finishing stitch for any kind of these blankets. So what we did was we did double-sized loops. So I'm going to pull a loop through each one of these. That is double the length of the loops that I was pulling before. And I'm laying each one of these loops down because I'm trying to make sure that they're about the same size. And I'm pulling each one of these and I'm laying them down. And my working yarn happens to have landed over here, but your working yarn might have landed over here, and that's fine too. So where your working yarn ends is where the blanket is going to end. And I'm going to start over here and grab a loop, grab the next one, put my fingers through, grab the next one, put my fingers through, grab the next one, grab the next one, and grab the next one. And then to finish off your entire blanket, you would cut a tail. And then you're going to pull that tail through and make that tight. And then I usually kind of take my tail through another spot just to kind of give it another layer of knot. And then you can go ahead and cut this pretty close to where your knot is, and you're not really going to be able to see it. Yay, we see some pictures in the chat. Thank you for sharing that, so I know that you've made something. So this is a great swatch. Now, some people have talked about color change, so we will talk about that before we go too. So I'm going to give myself a chain, and I'm going to give myself a couple of rows. So I'm starting with my slip knot. I'm grabbing that yarn, pulling it through. With my chain, I grab loops. I grab loops, just grabbing a little bit of that working yarn and making a couple of chains. And then apparently this is the trickiest part for me today, is making sure I get this part right, where I leave the first stitch alone and pull up the second stitch. So I'm leaving the first stitch alone and I'm pulling up through here, up and over, up and over, up and over. And I'm going to do just a couple of quick rows and I'll show you a color change.
Hey, Megan.
Yeah.
There was a question I think you may have missed. Someone is asking if I do believe if it's curving, does it mean that they're pulling too tight?
If it's curving, does it mean they're pulling too tight? I don't think so. I think if it's totally flat and not fanning out, your stitches might be so loose that you might have you might be able to see through them. You might have a lot of space in between them. So yeah, that might be, I think it's pretty natural for them to fan out. Okay, I'm going to build one more row and then I'm going to show you how to change color. It's really not going to be as hard as you might imagine it is. Okay, So when I come to the end of my skein, or if I'm deciding to change color, so this is me running out of yarn, you're gonna find another skein of whatever color you want to add to it. I wasn't planning on a yellow blanket today, so forgive me if these colors are not good together. Let's see. And I can't find, here we go. Haha. So, remember your working yarn is gonna go this way next. So I'm literally just going to tie this on with a normal knot and get that pretty close to where I just left off. If you want to do a double knot, you can, but honestly, I don't think you'll need it. Be careful with this because it will bust if you pull it too tight, but get it nice and tight together. And then I literally just trim down the two sides to kind of keep it like one continuous strand. And that's all that you do in order to keep adding the same color skeins when you run out of one or to change a color. So now that I have that done, I can pull up and you'll start seeing the red appear. Get myself some more red yarn. And you can change as often as you'd like, just cutting and kind of cutting and pasting, essentially, just cutting the skeins and adding them together with a knot. And you can change as often as you like, or just change when you absolutely have to. And I'm going to do another row just to show you that new color popping out. And I'm using this variegated, which is really pretty with these reds and pinks and whites in it. Maybe not pretty with this yellow, but you know. Ooh, we got some pictures of some people. Yeah, the width could make a scarf. We've talked about too that some people have made hats using this chunky knit, hand knit technique too. So yeah, you could definitely make a scarf. You can definitely make a throw. You can definitely make a blanket. And you'll notice on this side where I have my knit stitches, it's a pretty smooth transition with my colors. But when you are on the other side, on your purl stitches, you will always have this color line here. So if you do change colors, you will kind of have that color line. If you use the same color throughout, you'll never notice that when you change your skeins, but if you are changing colors, you'll learn that. So for sure, that's how you can do that color change. And then you can go ahead and pull double loops and finish off one last time I'm going to do. So I'm going to pull double sized loops. We're so glad that you came. Thanks for sticking with it. Can't wait to see some things. If you have something you want to show me, either a swatch or when you actually complete your blanket, I'd love to see what you're making. If you have Instagram, you can tag us at Learn with Michaels, and then I can see what you're making. If you like this, and if you got the hang of this hand knitting, I can show you how to make a hand knit heart. I can show you how to make a hand knit bunny. There's lots of different classes. So I've made double the length loops. Here's my working yarn. I go back through one more time and grab and switch, grab and switch, grab and switch. And I'm making that nice finishing stitch across the top. I'm going to cut a tail. And I'm going to pull that. And you might want to go through one more time and kind of go through one of the other stitches to kind of create another knot and pull it as tight as you can. And then you can trim that down pretty close. And the one at the beginning too, you can go ahead and trim that down really close too. And you'll make a beautiful blanket. So thank you so much for coming. If you have a couple more questions, I can answer some more in the chat. So what part of the home row do you use to count? So you use your chain stitches to count how many going across. And if you're doing a full size blanket, I think somewhere between 20 and 30 stitches, depending on how big or how tight your stitches are. So once you have that long list of chain stitches, if you want it to be an exact number, then go ahead and do 1 over that. Let me see if there's other questions I've missed. So this exact class will be available on the Michael's YouTube channel, hopefully by the end of today, but definitely by tomorrow. Please keep trying. You know, if you didn't get it this time, join us again, watch it again, and I think you're going to enjoy this process. Once you get the hang of it, it's very relaxing. It's very meditative. You just keep pulling loops, and you can make some really beautiful things. So thank you for coming. It's been a pleasure, and we'll see you again soon.